Wake of the Bellerophon by T.B. Dahl. Chapter 16, Lieutenant Examination. As the date of his examination approached, Thomas Oxenham discovered that fear could be more scholarly than cannon fire. It sat with him late into the night over tables, logs, diagrams, notes, sail plans, tide calculations, gunnery sequences, articles of war, prize law, cadrol, coastal bearings, and enough mathematics to make a weaker man consider the army. He worked by the light of a single candle in the midshipman's berth, the flame bending whenever Defiance shifted at anchor, throwing his own shadow across the page like an examining captain already finding fault. The lieutenant's examination had a reputation. This was never a good thing. Some men spoke of it with theatrical horror, as if 3 post-captains and a table were more dreadful than a French broadside. Others dismissed it, usually men who had already passed and wished to improve the past by pretending not to have feared it. Candidates failed for ignorance, panic, arrogance, poor seamanship, bad luck, or because a captain on the board had developed a dislike of their first answer and nursed it through the remainder. Thomas knew the stakes. A commission meant more than a step in pay, though that mattered. It meant rank, authority, the first true rung toward command. A lieutenant was no longer one of the young gentlemen, half student and half errand runner, permitted ambition only while supervised. A lieutenant stood watch, gave orders, commanded boats, led men in battle, carried responsibility into weather, darkness, and fire. A lieutenant could be wrong in ways that killed. Failure meant remaining a midshipman, waiting, explaining, trying again, watching younger men rise while one's own promise yellowed at the edges. The night before the examination, Thomas sat alone in the berth, reviewing a diagram of a ship taken aback in a sudden squall. The others had gone ashore or found excuses to leave him to his nervous industry. Defiance creaked quietly around him. The ship at anchor had her own sleeping language, water against hull, rope strain, distant footsteps, the occasional mutter of men on watch. Lieutenant Parkington found him there. The lieutenant stood at the entrance, arms folded. "Enough, Oxenham." Thomas looked up. "Sir?" "You are as prepared as study will make you." Thomas rubbed his eyes. "Just a few more problems." "No." Parkington crossed the berth, closed the book, and placed one hand flat upon it. "The captains will not be examining your ability to calculate until you drop insensible across the table. They will be looking for an officer, a clear head, a sound answer. Judgment under pressure?" Thomas looked at the closed book as if it had betrayed him. "Suppose they ask something I have not reviewed?" "They will." That was not comforting. Parkington continued, "Then you will think that is why the Navy has not yet replaced lieutenants with printed tables." Thomas gave a tired smile. "To your hammock," Parkington said. "That is an order." "Aye, sir." "Sir." Sleep came slowly. Thomas lay in the canvas, listening to the familiar timber song of the ship and thinking of the path behind him. Newton Ferrers, the pond, William's punt, Reverend Makepeace and Latin, James teaching stars and leeway, Bellerophon's gun deck, the smoke of the glorious first, Farley's voice, the burning of Lorient, Nelson's telescope, William's forge, Eliza's ledgers, Defiance under storm canvas, Captain Murray's stern eyes over his logbook. 6 years of service. 6 years, and tomorrow 3 captains might decide they had amounted to something less than enough. He slept at last uneasily as the ship creaked around him like an old tutor refusing to offer reassurance. Morning arrived before dawn. Thomas woke before he was called, eyes open to the dim orlop gloom. The berth was nearly empty. The other candidates had sensibly lodged ashore, closer to the examination, and further from the damp democracy of shipboard sleep. Thomas had remained aboard. The decision had seemed wise the previous evening. Defiance was familiar. Her sound steadied him. Her motion belonged under his feet. Now, in the hour before judgment, the empty berth made his solitude official. Today would decide him. Thomas rose and prepared with painful care. Best shirt, clean waistcoat, uniform coat brushed until the blue cloth looked as if it possessed confidence, buttons inspected, stockings pulled smooth, shoes polished, hair tied, queue neat, recommendation letters folded and secured. Captain Murray, Captain Foley. His logbooks lay ready, worn and dense with years, weather, course, sail, latitude, longitude, remarks, corrections, dead reckoning, observation, storms, battles, failures, improvements. His life in ink, waiting to be judged by men who had seen more ink and more death than he had. His hands trembled slightly while combing his hair. He noticed and stopped. Steady, Oxenham, he muttered. You have faced French cannon. The reflection in the small glass did not appear persuaded. This is only conversation with 3 old sea dogs. That was a lie. French cannon had been impersonal. Shot did not care whether a man knew prize law, and the examining board would. He shaved slowly, nicked his chin, swore under his breath, pressed cloth to the blood, and decided that bleeding before the exam was better than bleeding during it. In the wardroom, Mr. Knox, the master's mate, sat alone over coffee. There he is, Knox said. The man of the hour. Thomas inclined his head. The firing squad awaits. So I am told. The steward brought salt beef and biscuit. Thomas looked at it with no appetite and began eating anyway. Nerves were no excuse for stupidity. Knox leaned back. You will do well enough. You have a good head. Try not to let the old vultures peck through it. Thomas swallowed. Advice? Speak clearly. Do not gabble. Do not bluff. If you do not know, say so, then explain how you would find out. Captains dislike ignorance, but they loathe fraud, and call them sir, every time. Even if they ask whether the mizzen mast is forward of the bowsprit. Thomas almost smiled. You were asked that? No, but if I had been, I should have answered cautiously. After breakfast, Thomas gathered his logbooks and papers. The boat waited alongside. As he descended Defiance's side, he looked back at her weathered hull. For 2 years she had been school, workplace, trial, and shelter. When he returned, if he returned, he might do so changed. A failed candidate rejoining with certificate absent and eyes lowered, or a past man awaiting commission. The boat pulled across calm harbour water. Morning sun flashed on the ripples. Portsmouth stirred into full naval life. Gulls, cranes, dockyard carts, boats crossing, marines, sailors, clerks, riggers, shipwrights, smoke, tar, hemp, salt, and 1,000 smells of a port that fed war, as if war were an enormous animal kept just offshore. Thomas rehearsed silently, running before a gale, ship on a lee shore, man overboard, compass variation, prize crew discipline, mutiny, fire aboard, tacking under reduced canvas, sprung mast, jury rudder, close action, blockade law, no answer, survived rehearsal unchanged. At the Port Admiral's office, a harried clerk directed him to a waiting room occupied by 3 other midshipmen. One thin, sallow youth whispered navigation formulae like prayers. Another stared at the wall with such intensity that the plaster seemed in danger. The third was older, broad-shouldered and weathered, with the tight stillness of a man for whom failure would not be youthful inconvenience, but disaster. Thomas nodded to them and sat with his logbooks on his knees. Time crawled. The wall clock ticked with indecent clarity. One by one, candidates were called. One returned pale and relieved. One returned with a red face and no words. The older candidate came out last, expression fixed, eyes bright with contained despair. He walked past without seeing any of them. A marine appeared. Midshipman Oxenham. Thomas stood. Yes, you are to report to H&MS Victory for examination at noon. Thomas blinked. Victory? Yes. Thank you. His voice remained steady. His stomach did not. HMS Victory. Nelson's flagship, a first-rate whose very name carried half the weight of the Royal Navy's public imagination. Examinations were often held in offices or aboard whichever ship had available captains and sufficient furniture. Victory added no official difficulty, yet somehow made the day feel as if history itself had decided to observe. Outside, the morning mist had burned off. Thomas had nearly 2 hours. He walked because sitting would have permitted too much thought. Ships lined the dockyard in various stages of service and repair, some fresh-painted and ready, others open to their bones. One frigate had battle damage along her side, new timber pale against old oak. Dock workers moved under shouted orders. Marines passed in files. Sailors hauled casks. A boatswain cast a coil of rope with intimate precision. Victory's masts rose above the forest. When Thomas first saw her full side, black and yellow and immense, he stopped despite himself. A ship of the line he knew, a 74 he knew. Victory was something else. 3 decks, vast stern, massive guns, a flagship's bearing. She seemed less moored than presiding. At noon, Thomas presented himself at the entry port. The Marine examined his order. Midshipman for examination. Report to Lieutenant Quilliam on the quarter-deck. Thomas stepped aboard. The deck beneath his feet was solid, scrubbed, alive with work. Victory was larger than Defiance, broader in movement, more ornate in fittings, but still a ship. This comforted him. Men still coiled rope, officers still corrected, boys still ran messages, guns still occupied space like sleeping threats. Grandeur did not abolish duty. Lieutenant Quilliam, trim, salt-and-pepper hair tied neatly, received him near the wheel. Midshipman Oxenham, "Yes, sir, reporting for examination." "Follow me." He led Thomas below, through the gun deck where men drilled with 32-pounders, past Marines at attention, through passages that smelled of polish, powder, tar, and authority, to a small anteroom near the captain's quarters. 2 candidates waited there already, tense and silent. "Wait here," Quilliam said. "You will be called." Waiting, Thomas decided, was an underrated cruelty. The first candidate went in. Time passed. He emerged shaken, but not destroyed. The second went in. More time. He returned pale, tight-lipped, and left without looking at anyone. Then the Marine opened the door. "Midshipman Oxenham." Thomas stood. His logbooks felt heavier than they had that morning. He entered the captain's day cabin. Light came through the stern windows and fell across a mahogany table. Behind it sat 3 post-captains in full-dress uniform, gold epaulettes bright, faces seasoned by decades of salt, command, and disappointed subordinates. Thomas recognized Captain Howard of Minotaur in the center. Captain Reynolds of Orion sat to his right. Captain Miller of Theseus to his left. Nile veterans, fighting captains, men who had watched ships burn and boys fail. Thomas saluted. Midshipman Thomas Oxenham, presenting himself for examination for the rank of lieutenant. Captain Howard regarded him steadily. "Approach, Mr. Oxenham." Thomas stepped forward and presented logbooks and recommendations. The captains examined the documents in silence. Paper shifted, pages turned. A brow lifted, murmured comments passed between them, too low to catch. Howard opened Captain Murray's letter. "Captain Murray speaks highly of your navigation." Captain Foley's letter followed. "And Captain Foley remembers your conduct at the Nile." Thomas stood very still. "Recommendations carry a man to the door," Howard said. "They do not pass him through it." "Yes, sir." "Let us begin with your logs." The 3 captains opened the volumes. Thomas watched his years spread before them. There was the uncertain hand of his early Bellerophon days, gradually tightening into disciplined entries. The Glorious first, Portsmouth repairs, the Nile, Goliath, Aboukir, Defiance, storms, convoys, bearings, calculations, corrections, remarks on crew condition after Captain Murray's criticism. There was too much of him in those pages to feel comfortable having them read by strangers. Captain Reynolds paused. Your penmanship is unusually legible. Thank you, sir. I did not say it was a virtue, only unusual. Yes, sir. Reynolds tapped a page. March 17th, 98. Discrepancy in longitude. Thomas felt the first cold flash of panic. He forced himself not to rush. Yes, sir. The chronometer had been damaged after heavy weather. I recalculated by lunar distance and noted correction in the margin. Reynolds looked again. So you did? He turned the page. The panic receded, not gone. Stowed properly. At last Howard closed the final book. Very well, we proceed. He leaned forward. You are officer of the watch. The ship is running before a gale under reduced canvas. Lookout reports shoal water ahead. What do you do? Thomas drew breath. Bring the ship's head to the wind if sea room permits, sir. With shoal water ahead, I would not continue running. I would order helm down to bring her to, prepare to reduce further canvas, and take immediate soundings. If coming about were unsafe or she missed stays, I would consider wearing if there is sufficient room. But with shoal water ahead, the greater danger is delay. Howard's eyes narrowed. You first said bring her head to the wind. Suppose she refuses stays. Then use head sails to pay her off. Adjust after canvas. And if necessary, let go an anchor if depth permits, and the danger is immediate. I would also call the captain at once. You would call the captain? Yes, sir. An officer of the watch must act immediately, but not conceal a developing hazard from command. Howard nodded slightly. Good. Next. The questions came, not as orderly lessons, as weather. You command a cutter with a prize crew. Mainmast sprung in a storm. Lee shore. What actions? Your ship takes battle damage below the waterline. Pumps barely keep pace. Enemy still engaged. Continue or withdraw? How determine compass variation without reliable celestial observation? What marks a well-led gun crew? How clear a fouled anchor in tide? Explain club hauling. Your captain is wounded and first lieutenant killed. You are the senior surviving officer on deck. What must be done first? Thomas answered. Some answers came cleanly, others required thought. A few exposed gaps. When uncertain, he said so. I would consult the master, sir. I would ask the carpenter's report before deciding, sir. My knowledge of that point is incomplete, sir, but my action would be to secure immediate safety first and then seek proper authority. Captain Miller asked Prizelaw. A neutral merchantman, papers in order, captain nervous. You suspect contraband for the enemy. What do you do? I exercise right of search, according to custom of war, sir. Minimum delay if innocent. Proper seizure if contraband discovered. Crew treated lawfully. And if the flag belongs to a power whose friendship His Majesty's government values, then documentation becomes more important, not less. Evidence must be exact. Witnesses named, cargo listed, papers preserved. I would not let fear of diplomatic inconvenience blind me to contraband, but neither would I create an incident through sloppiness. Miller's mouth moved. Sloppiness has caused more diplomacy than contraband. Yes, sir. Reynolds took him through gunnery. Close quarter action. Enemy crossing your stern. What orders? Train aftermost guns. Load with double shot if range and gun condition permit. Marines to stern galleries and quarter. Clear men from unnecessary exposure. Prepare to repair helm damage. If stern rake unavoidable, minimize time exposed by helm and sail handling. Carronades. Devastating at close range, sir, but not to be treated as long guns. Their value lies in heavy short-range fire. Their danger lies in optimism. Howard asked seamanship again, then command, then discipline. A seaman refuses an order aloft in heavy weather. He is experienced and says the line is unsafe. What do you do?" Thomas paused. The answer was not merely discipline. "I would first judge whether his objection has merit, sir. If the line or work is indeed unsafe unnecessarily, I correct the danger. If the work is necessary and the objection cowardice or defiance, I enforce obedience. But I would not punish a man for seeing a danger I had missed." Howard studied him. "And if others see hesitation?" "I would make the decision quickly and publicly enough to preserve authority. Delay is more damaging than correction," Miller said. "You have learned from warrant officers." "Yes, sir." "Good." The examination stretched into its third hour. Thomas's throat dried. The stern light shifted. Sweat gathered beneath his collar, though the cabin was not warm. He became aware, halfway through, that he was no longer merely enduring questions. He was working them. Each scenario opened like weather or battle. Facts, dangers, priorities, men, ship, mission, law, command. He did not know everything. No honest officer did. But he knew how to think aboard a ship. At last Howard straightened. "That will do, Mr. Oxenham. Wait outside while we deliberate." Thomas saluted and withdrew. The anteroom was empty. He sat on the bench. Only then did exhaustion strike. His uniform clung damply at the back. His hands ached from having been held too still. His mind, freed from answering, began at once to torture him with improvements. He should have mentioned backing the mizzen topsail. He had answered too quickly on prize law, too slowly on club hauling. Perhaps optimism had been too informal regarding carronades. Perhaps Miller had smiled because it amused him before failing him. Perhaps Howard's nod meant approval. Perhaps it meant gas. Thomas fixed his eyes on the grain of the deck and traced one dark line until it met another, anything to keep thought from circling. The door opened. "Mr. Oxenham." Thomas rose. He entered. The captain sat as before, faces unreadable. Howard spoke. "We have reviewed your examination." Thomas stood at attention. "Your navigation is exemplary. Your ship handling is sound. Your command decisions show judgment, though experience will do what examination cannot." Thomas held breath without meaning to. "There are areas for improvement. Prize law, particularly in delicate neutral cases. Close-quarter gunnery under damaged conditions. You will attend to both." "Yes, sir." Howard paused. "However, we are satisfied that you possess the knowledge and qualities required of a lieutenant in His Majesty's Navy." The room altered, not visibly. Inside Thomas, something gave way. "Congratulations, Mr. Oxenham. You have passed." His knees considered behavior unbecoming to a future officer. He refused them. "Thank you, sir." Captain Reynolds handed him the certificate, signed by all three. "This certifies your passing. Present it to the Admiralty for commission." Captain Miller added, "Your instructors have done their work well. See that you do not waste it." "No, sir," Howard nodded. "You are dismissed." Thomas saluted, turned, left. Outside the cabin, he stopped beside the passage and closed his eyes. Passed. After 6 years. After storm, blockade, convoy, Nile. Blood, mathematics, night watches, scoldings, bruises, hunger, grief, and every wet rope hauled hand over hand toward this hour. Passed. He went up toward the quarterdeck, feeling as though victory herself had become lighter beneath his feet. The deck above was busy with flags, officers, marines, and the controlled confusion of a flagship receiving and sending orders. Thomas, too absorbed in the certificate inside his coat, nearly collided with a slight figure coming up the companionway. "Your pardon, sir?" He stopped. Empty right sleeve pinned across the coat. One eye, the other bright enough to make rank unnecessary. Rear Admiral Sir Horatio Nelson stood before him. "No harm done," Nelson said. "You seem in haste." Thomas saluted sharply. "My apologies, Admiral. I have just completed my lieutenant's examination." Nelson's expression warmed. "Have you? And how did you fare?" "I passed, sir, Excellent. The service needs officers now more than ever. Nelson looked more closely. Your name? Oxenham, sir. Thomas Oxenham. Recognition flickered. Oxenham. Nile. Goliath, was it not? Thomas was too surprised to hide it. Yes, sir. Temporarily assigned from Bellerophon. I remember men who were useful at critical moments, Nelson said. Captain Foley spoke of your channel work. Thank you, sir. And now Defiance under Murray. Yes, sir. Good. Murray has requested you remain aboard as lieutenant once commissioned. Somewhat irregular, but irregularities are tolerable when useful. I have added my word. Thomas stared for a fraction too long and recovered. I am deeply honoured, sir. Do not thank me for your own merit, Nelson said. Thank your captains, your father, your teachers, and the habit of keeping your head when others mislay theirs. Thomas almost smiled. Nelson glanced toward the shore. Now go secure the formalities. May the wind be at your back, Lieutenant Oxenham. Lieutenant Oxenham. The words struck harder from Nelson than from the examining board. Nelson moved on, leaving Thomas standing very still in the midst of Victory's quarterdeck. Then Thomas went down the gangway and into Portsmouth dockyard with his certificate tucked inside his coat. Close to his heart, the dockyard had not changed. Carts rolled, men shouted, gulls screamed. Tar smoked, rope smelled of hemp. A clerk dropped papers and cursed the wind. The world inconsiderately continued as if Thomas had not just crossed the invisible border between youth and commission. Near the main gate, a familiar broad-shouldered figure detached itself from the crowd. Thomas? William Rowe came toward him, grinning. What are you doing here? Thomas asked. Waiting. For hours, by the look of you. Worth it if you passed. If you failed, I planned to say I'd only just arrived. Thomas laughed, and the laugh came out with more relief than amusement. He drew the certificate from his coat. I passed. William let out a whoop loud enough to turn several sailors' heads. I knew it. Did you? Never doubted. You are a poor liar. A loyal one. William clapped him on the shoulder, then remembered dignity and lowered his voice a little. Lieutenant Oxenham, Thomas looked at the certificate, not formally yet. Near enough for a drink? I must take this to the Admiralty. It has waited 6 years. It may wait 1 hour. Thomas hesitated. William leaned closer. I have news from home. Good news. Forge news. Eliza news. Eliza news? William's ears coloured. Business news, he amended. Thomas looked at him, then at the Admiralty direction, and then back. 1 drink. 1 drink, William agreed with the sincerity of a man defining one flexibly. They found a tavern near the dockyard where the floor was sticky, the ale decent, and the company too loud to care about examination certificates unless they came with money, William ordered. Thomas sat with his back to the wall by habit. For a moment neither spoke. Between them lay childhood, pond water, victory, defiance, the forge, prize money, Greystone House, Nelson's word, Eliza's letters, dead friends, living ambition, and a certificate folded inside Thomas's coat. William lifted his mug. To Lieutenant Oxenham. Thomas touched his mug to William's. To Rowe Ironworks? William smiled. We are calling it Rowe and Jenkins for now. Jenkins insists his name will keep creditors respectful. Will it? No, but it keeps him cheerful. They drank. William leaned forward. Now tell me everything. What did they ask? Was it as terrifying as you feared? Thomas set down his mug. He began with the waiting room. The other candidates, the summons to victory, the 3 captains, the logbooks, the question about shoal water in a gale. William listened as he had listened beside the pond years before, eyes intent, body still, taking in each detail. The story was already changing as Thomas told it, not becoming false, but becoming shaped. Terror softened into suspense, questions into trials, relief into humour. That is how men survive memory. They put it in order and offer it to a friend. When Thomas finished, William sat back. And Nelson called you lieutenant? He did. Then that settles it. The Admiralty may take a different view. Then the Admiralty is wrong. Thomas laughed. William's expression turned more serious. Eliza said you would pass. Did she? She said you have always known how to find a way through difficult water. Thomas looked down at his mug. Did she say that exactly? Near enough. William, she writes better than I remember. That is because she edits herself before speaking. William smiled into his drink. She edits me too. Someone must. A silence settled, warmer than most. Outside, Portsmouth roared on. Inside, Thomas felt the strange joining of worlds. Behind him stood victory, examination, Nelson, the great machinery of service. Across from him sat William, iron worker, friend, brother of boyhood, a man rising by hand and will into a future no one had granted him. Thomas was no longer the boy with toy boats, no longer the new midshipman hauling a sea chest through Bellerophon's entry port, no longer merely stabbing Tom, nor the young navigator of Goliath, nor Defiance's promising candidate. He was, or soon would be, Lieutenant Oxenham of His Majesty's Navy. The question that had followed him since childhood had not ended. It had only changed uniform. What kind of officer would he become? What kind of man could survive becoming one? Thomas touched the certificate through his coat. The paper crackled faintly beneath his fingers. Come, he said, standing. Admiralty first. Then you may tell me this business news you claim involves Eliza only by accident. William rose, grinning. By strict coincidence. Of course. They stepped back into the dockyard noise together. Above the harbour, gulls wheeled and cried. Beyond the masts, the sea waited with its usual patience, and Thomas Oxenham, newly passed for lieutenant, walked toward the Admiralty with his oldest friend at his side, and the next horizon already forming beyond the roofs of Portsmouth.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.